When I was still in high school, whenever I had to do a book report, I have to admit I never read a single book that I had to review. And what I always did is I waited until the very last minute. Then I tried to Google a summary of the book, and then I used the summary to make my book report. I somehow still passed all of them, but I just never read any of the books. Which is interesting because as a young girl, I really liked reading. When I was really small and still in elementary school, I loved writing already at the time. I loved reading. I feel like I was really good at reading as well from a very young age, but I just kind of fell out of love with it. But up until recently, because around 2, maybe 3 years ago, I got back into reading, and it wasn't the non-fictional self-help books that got me back into reading. I really thought that I would like really enjoy reading those, but to be honest, I can never get through a self-help book because I always just get kind of bored. I mean, I prefer to learn through videos and through audio, so I think maybe reading self-help just wasn't for me, which is why I just never picked up a book because I kind of forgot that reading fictional books was an option as well up until like about 2 years ago, because that's when I started to read fictional books again. And now I totally love reading again because it makes me feel so calm, so peaceful, and that's exactly what I want more of in my life. So in this video, I'm gonna share some of the books that got me back into reading, and I'll save the best one for last. The first book that got me back into reading was It Ends With Us. I think I got it as a recommendation from one of my friends because it was a super popular book at the time. And then I followed it up with the second part, which is It Starts With Us. I really liked reading both of these because both of them were such like easy reads, which made it a lot more accessible and which made it more fun for me to grab the book and to continue reading. I'm gonna try to explain a little bit what the book is about without spoiling anything. I feel like a lot of people already know this book because it's so popular, but It Ends With Us is about a girl that meets a guy and then they end up being in kind of like an abusive relationship. And then It Starts With Us is the follow up on the first book. And it hit like a lot of different spots. It's romantic, but it's also complicated and it's emotional. And there's just so many things happening in the books that, made it very interesting to keep reading. Another book I really enjoyed reading was Spring at the Cornish Garden Cafe. It's a really wholesome book, very easily written as well. And it's about a girl that moves back in with her grandma in like a small little village. And then she meets a guy, and that's all I'll say about it. But it's just a super cute story and also just so easy to pick up and to keep reading. Another book I liked reading was Before the Coffee Gets Cold because it is made up of like different small stories all existing within one big story. It's about a little coffee shop in Japan, and in this coffee shop you can buy a specific kind of coffee that does a specific kind of thing to you. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it's just really nice to see a lot of different stories happening within the same book. There's a lot of different visitors in the coffee shop that have their own story and their own like problems and feelings, and it's just really nice to have a lot of different perspectives in just one book. There's more books to this series, but I have to admit that I enjoyed reading Before the Coffee Gets Cold the most in the whole series. I like reading romance books, but after a while of reading a lot of romance, I feel like I need kind of like a change of scenery, I guess, because sometimes with these romance books, it can be very predictive. Then you have the storyline where two people meet and then it goes well, and then they like break up and then they make up and all that stuff. So sometimes I like to take a break of the love stories, and then after I took a break of them, I'll be so excited to read them again. But whenever I want to take a break of the love stories, I like to read something in another genre, and I don't know what the genre is called that I really enjoy, but it's kind of like mystery, magical. And some of the books I read in the last few years were The Last Bookshop. I really enjoyed reading The Last Bookshop. It's about 3 different characters and they all have their own storyline. But if you like magic slash mystery, it's a really nice read. Another book from the same author is The Mysterious Bakery on Rue de Paris. And I have it in my hand right here because I just recently read it. And I really like this one as well. It has the same kind of vibe, I feel like. It's about a woman and she moves from Dublin, if I remember correctly, to Paris, and then she ends up at a place she didn't expect to end up, and then a lot of stuff happens there. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's just such a fun and comfy read as well. A lot of mysterious things happen in the bakery, and she's trying to unfold the mysteries and like find her place in everything that's happening. And I only finished this like a week ago, and I really, really enjoyed reading this story. What I'm currently reading is called The Midnight Library, and I'm reading it on my e-reader. And I really like reading this one as well. I'm still in like the first half of the book, but it's about a woman and she tries to take her own life and then ends up in what's called the Midnight Library. And then she can choose a lot of different lives she could have lived and see if any of those are any better than the one that she lived in previously. And so far, I really enjoy reading it because it gives you a lot of perspective about life and the choices you make and the regrets you have, and like how maybe the grass is not always greener on the other side. Then another one that I read recently is called The Holder of Hope. This is not like a magical book, but it's not really a love book either. And that's why I really enjoyed reading it, to take a break from all the romance, and to just read about something else. It's about a woman and she's a firefighter, and she and her husband also want to get pregnant. And she has a best friend she's also super close with. And there's just a lot of stuff happening between them, with them. She is also navigating the grief of her parents, and the story just kind of follows her through life and through choices she has to make. And yeah, I just thought it was an interesting read. Then for the last one I'm talking about today, it's my absolute favorite at the moment. It's a recommendation I got from a friend of mine. She gifted me the physical book, and I am so incredibly grateful to her because I read all 4 or 5 of the books within like a few months, and I'm a slow reader. So that says a lot to me about how much I enjoyed reading those. And the book is called Magnolia Parks. It's truly such a nice story and so beautifully written as well. And it's not only romance, there's so much happening within the entire series. So the first part of Magnolia Parks is about a girl and a boy, and they're in this kind of socialite group in London and come from wealthy families. And then these two have like an on and off relationship, like a little bit toxic, and but still really love each other. And you just get to read a lot about their relationship with each other, the complications of it, their whole friend group. And then what I like a lot about this book and the series in its entirety is how many different POVs you have, because in the first one you have the POV of the girl and the guy. So then sometimes you'll read something through her perspective, and then after that you'll read it through his perspective, and it's just really nice to like change it up a little. And then the second book is actually about different characters of the series, and I really enjoyed the switch of the characters as well, because they just lived such different lives. And I feel like in the second one there was also a bit more like action in it, which I really enjoyed. It was a nice switch from the romance to romance plus real action. And then they kept alternating between the series. So the first book is the guy and the girl's POV. Then the second book is 2 other people's POV, or 3 actually, 3 other people's POVs. And then they go back in the third book to the first 2 persons POV. I hope this makes sense. But I would highly, highly recommend, if you're getting into reading, and you want to read something that's interesting, but also kind of like an easy and nice read, something that you want to keep reading, like keep picking up because you're so curious about what's happening next, then Magnolia Parks is such a nice book to read. And I know for sure if you read the first one, you're gonna want to read all of the other ones as well. I do recommend reading them in the correct order so that it all makes sense and that you know like all the like small remarks and everything. And what I also really liked about this series is like I said, it's not just about romance and about the relationships. It's also packed with action, but it also covers a lot of different topics in the books. And I don't want to spoil too much about it, so I won't go into detail about what the topics are. But I just found myself being surprised every single time how there's a lot of plot twists in the books, and there's just so many different things happening, and it just never got boring. And there were also some life lessons in them. I feel like, especially in the last book, I felt like there were some life lessons, and I just really, really enjoyed reading these. I hope that they're gonna make a movie or like a series about this someday, because I'd love to see how that would play out in like visual real life, if that makes sense. So those are a few of the books that I read recently, and I am still kind of exploring genres. I'm not really sure what I actually like, but I think I just enjoy switching it up a little bit so that I am still like interested all the time and curious. I like to switch up romance with mystery, a little bit of magic. But yeah, I'm open to all other genres as well, to be honest. So if you have any good recommendations of books that got you back into reading or that you just really, really enjoyed, please let me know. And with that being said, I also want to acknowledge that it can be a bit hard to get into reading if you're used to not reading at all. To me personally, I always thought that I wasn't a reader, but now I would label myself as a reader because I read every single day. But for me, at least for years, I didn't want to pick up a book. I didn't know what to read. I felt like really slow with reading. And now I feel the complete opposite. Like, I get so much peace from reading, and I love getting completely immersed into these stories and like letting my imagination play it all out. So if you're still trying to get into reading, I have some tips written down here for you. The first one is, you don't have to finish every single book. I really thought that at the beginning, if I like started reading a book, I had to finish it as well. Not because someone told me to, but I just felt like it would be a bit incomplete if I didn't finish it. But there's just gonna be some books that you pick up that you don't end up liking, and that's fine. You can just stop reading it and pick up something new. I feel like life is too short to read a book you don't really like. So it's okay to just put it down and to choose something new. Also, give stories a chance, because I noticed that in the first chapter or maybe the first few chapters of books, I can get kind of bored because I just don't know the characters that well yet. I don't know what the story is about. I'm scared I'm gonna like forget the whole beginning. But if you give it a chance and just read through the first few chapters, then eventually you'll like start to get into it and start to get to know the characters and like start to remember the story and get like a little bit of a visual to it. So just give it a chance. And then if you're like a few chapters in and you still don't like it, then you can always put it down. Then another very obvious one is choose fiction. If you are reading a lot of nonfiction or self-help right now, or at least if you're trying to read those but you cannot get into them, just try to pick up a fictional book and read a story. For me personally, that really helped. Something else that really helped me was to get an e-reader. I have one from Pocketbook, and I just bought it in the store. And honestly, this helped me get into reading so much more. I read most of the books that I talked about on here as well, and I only just buy physical books sometimes. I also travel full time, so that's why an e reader is super, super handy. But even if I wouldn't be traveling, I think I'd read mostly on the e reader anyways, because I like to read at night. Talking about reading in bed, to me, it was such a good thing to build the habit of reading. And I built this habit, I think, kind of naturally eventually, because I really like reading before I go to bed instead of scrolling on my phone. So now I just always read before I go to sleep. And I just always really look forward to this moment in the evening where I can just pick up my book, continue my story. And also, if you're trying to build the habit of reading, don't be too hard on yourself, because if you're gonna say, like, every day I wanna read at least 10 pages or something like that, then it's gonna become something that has a number attached to it, which then makes it like more difficult and maybe a little less motivating to actually do it, because sometimes you'll only have time for like 3 pages, and that's fine as well. Something else I really like about books is choosing a new book. And I really love to browse through the bookshops and the libraries and What I also really like is at the airport when you have the bookshops, I like to like browse around those to see what kind of stories they have. And then I just save them somewhere in my phone for later on. So I'd highly recommend to just go to your local bookshop or to the library, or the next time you're at an airport or somewhere in a mall, just visit the bookstore and see what kind of books you would like to read. Then something else a friend of mine recommended to me was to use Goodreads. And Goodreads is an app where you can save books and like discover new books. And I use it to save the books that I have read already, and also to discover new ones that I maybe want to read in the future, because they have a really nice discovery page. And on there, you can also add your friends, you can share books, you can like them, you can rate them, you can track what you're reading now, what you're gonna read, what you already read, stuff like that. Which also makes me think of another tip. Maybe just try to read one book at a time. At least that's what really works for me. I feel like if I would read multiple books at a time, I'd get so overwhelmed, and like all the stories maybe will intertwine with each other, which could also actually be quite fun. But I feel like for me, it would be too overwhelming. So I just stick to one book at a time. And then when my one book is finished, I just go on to the next. And then my last tip would be is don't worry about being slow with reading. It's totally fine. You can read at your own pace. And I promise you that over time, you'll be faster at reading. At first, it would take me months to finish only one book, because I'd read like only a couple of pages a day, and sometimes I'd forget for a couple of days or weeks even. um, but I just kept on reading, and I truly noticed a difference from now versus the beginning when I started getting back into reading, because now I read a lot quicker, and I can only imagine that it'll work the same for you. So don't be intimidated by the fact that there's fast readers out there. Some people just read faster than others, and that's totally fine. Everyone has their own pace, and as long as you enjoy reading the story, then that's all you need. Anyways, those were my recommendations and also some tips on how to get into reading. Like I said, if you have any recommendations for me, please let me know. And yeah, that was it for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.